I wanted to say, first of all, it's an honor again to have you here. And how can we thank you for the strong leadership you've provided in New England? Governor Charlie Baker, we know about the 250,000 jobs that you've created since 2015 and the tax relief you've given to working families, and people are very proud of those initiatives. Governor Raimondo led probably one of the most important task forces in New England on economic development, where she connected higher education to the workforce. And that report that was written from the task force, and which she led, has gotten national acclaim. In addition to that, Governor Raimondo has put technology on the map in Rhode Island by bringing technology companies into the state and also encouraging computer science courses from elementary school all the way through the high school. And our own Governor Ned Lamont, a businessman who understands what it means to collaborate with businesses as a governor, is doing that with full force. He's a collaborator, a listener, and a wonderful, wonderful advocate for the state of Connecticut. And we're honored, as I said, that the three of you are here. This is a historical moment at Eastern, Connecticut's only public liberal arts university, and we're very proud of the education we provide for our students. One of the hallmarks of a liberal arts education is that you have an open mind, that you talk to people who think differently from you, that you listen carefully, that you allow yourself to collaborate and work with others, and that you work for the good of the whole. And today we have not just three governors meeting in the state of Connecticut, but three governors representing different political parties. And I think that that's just fantastic, and you're providing the role modeling that we need for our students, and we thank you for that. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thanks, Elsa. Yeah, that was good.
That's great.
Thanks for everybody for coming. I'll just follow up, Elsa. That's why I invited Governor Raimondo and Governor Baker. They are two of the most experienced and innovative governors in the country. And this is an informal lunch that we had, and I hope it's the beginning of many more to come. And as I mentioned at our lunch, you know, down when it comes to New Jersey and New York and that part of this country where we have our neighbors, we have the Regional Plan Association. There's an institution, works together a little bit. But here, when it comes to Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut, I think personal relationships are really important. And that's what we wanted to, you know, really kick off again today. For me, what was really important was these two folks coming to the table when we had an issue with Millstone and the thought that the nuclear power plant could have potentially pulled the plug, and what that would have meant for energy, not just in our state, but in our region. And, Charlie and Gina stood up along with the other governors, made an enormous difference there. We're now all working together when it comes to renewable energy in terms of wind power off the New London and Rhode Island coast. And we also talked a little bit about other ways that we can work together. I was particularly focused on purchasing and the idea of buying things more in collaboration, be it IT, be it telecom equipment, healthcare, other things where we can get some real savings. I spent a lot of time talking to our local towns, saying they can get some extraordinary savings if they think regionally, and we're trying to do the same here in our region, southern New England. Gina, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah,
Charlie?
well, first of all, thank you. Thank you to Elsa for hosting us. You have an extraordinary campus here, and thank you, Governor, for pulling this together. We had a productive and informal and candid discussion. We agreed that it was successful, and we want to keep doing it. So I have agreed to host the next one of these in Providence. We're going to do it in fall. We're going to aim for October to continue this discussion. Charlie and I have been at this a little longer than Ned, so we try to be helpful and share some of the experiences that we've had. We have a few more battle scars, so hopefully he can benefit and make his own mistakes, not the same mistakes we've made. But the truth of it is there are many issues, whether it's affordability of health care, renewable energy, transportation climate initiative, purchasing. We share employers. You know, Electric Boat is an employer that we both share. Fidelity is an employer that Massachusetts and Rhode Island share. We need to work together on these issues. You know, one of the best things about being governor is it's frankly a less partisan job, and we have to balance budgets, provide health care, fix the roads, plow the streets. None of that's partisan. And so we came together today to say, how can we help each other do our jobs better and deliver for the people of our state? And so, you know, hopefully a few people in Washington might take a page out of this book and say we're going to sit down across party lines and compare ideas and compare notes and actually try to solve problems. One of the things that I brought to the table this afternoon, was around our job training programs. So since I've been governor, a primary focus of mine, in addition to creating jobs, is making sure that every Rhode Islander has the training and skills they need to get these new jobs. And so we've launched a number of new successful job training programs. We call it Real Jobs Rhode Island. But it turns out that if somebody leaves Rhode Island, if somebody does one of these training programs and gets a job in another state, say Massachusetts and Connecticut, we don't share any of that wage data among our states. So we don't really know the full extent of success of our programs. And the same is true in these other states. So what I offered is maybe we ought to sign a joint data sharing agreement around wages, of course protecting, you know, privacy. In the same way we share unemployment data, share wage data, so we can actually know whether these programs are working. And I think that's nonpartisan, right? I think we can all agree that if we're going to spend taxpayer dollars on job training, for example, we ought to be able to measure the success and know if it's working. So there are complexities around this, but I think I have a rough agreement from my fellow governors to say, yes, we'd like to explore that. And when we get together in October, hopefully we can move that ball forward. But I would say it's terrific. You know, we have to solve problems. We have to help each other. And to the extent that we share borders, I think it's all the more important that we collaborate.
So first of all, Elsa, thank you. And to the team here, thank them for us. And Governor, we appreciate your decision to host this, and we look forward to continuing the conversation in October. Part of it is about where there are opportunities to collaborate. Part of it's about just having an opportunity to share stories, good ones and bad ones, and strategies, good ones and bad ones. One of the things that's certainly true about a job like this is there aren't a lot of other people who have it, and because of that, it's often hard to find folks who walk in the same shoes that you walk in, and in a conversation like that can speak pretty directly about not just how they're thinking about dealing with particular issues, but also experiences they've had and what's worked and what hasn't. And I pointed out that in a number of instances, we borrowed policies and procedures and strategies that were being pursued in some of these other states as part of things we've already done. I was particularly interested in checking in with both of these folks on the Transportation Climate Initiative, because that is 10 or 11 states, maybe as many as 12 or 14, that have been involved in this now for the past 6-7 months. And I think most people know the goal on that one is to see if we can't create something that resembles the regional greenhouse gas emission program that we put together for energy, and do that in transportation. And I think people are pretty well committed to that, and the goal obviously is to see if we can't come up with an agreement between the states by the end of this calendar year. And the best part about that is if you do this on a regional basis, then many of the issues associated with competitive positioning and avoidance go away. And I also appreciated the conversation about renewable energy, and especially about wind. And I certainly hope that we'll be able to build on some of the sort of introductory conversations we had about transportation, because that's another thing we all share, which is whether you're talking about roads and bridges or trains. They don't really care about the borders. We share those, and I think the other thing that I'll look forward to pursuing a little bit going forward is trying to learn from some of these other regional collaboratives that already exist out there, and find out if there are things we can bring to a conversation among those of us in southern New England and maybe the rest of New England as well.
Governor Lamont, speaking of battle scars, we know that Governor Baker inherited tolls but implemented cashless tolls during his administration, and Governor Raimondo, I believe, inherited some tolls but implemented some. Did the topic ever come up? Did you get any advice from your toll collecting governors on your current battle scheme?
I think I got a little bit of advice. One piece of advice is there's a battle, and when the battle is done and you start putting in a transportation infrastructure that works for the 21st century, the battle goes in the rearview mirror pretty quickly. I think one thing that Charlie and Gina reminded me is the battle is never over. And maybe sometimes in the first round it doesn't go the way you want it, but you keep coming back and people evolve and they learn more on an issue, and pretty soon it passes and you turn the page and you move forward.
Well, following up on that, we've been told, and it's been reported, that you are changing your mind about your debt diet in an effort to try to get them, the legislature, to put something up on the boards in the form of a limited tolling plan. Can you comment on that?
I'll comment in this sense. Connecticut has more debt per capita than any state in the country. We're burdened by the amount of debt, and politicians are addicted to debt. So I know there's a natural tendency to see if they can borrow our way out of this transportation crisis. You know, that said, look, I believe that electronic tolling is a big part of the solution, paid for by users. Thanks to my friends from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, they might be able to contribute a little bit as part of that. And if bonding is also going to be part of the solution, I'll consider that as part of a compromise. Yes.
We've been told, everyone, I think, in the press corps has heard that there's $1.3 billion in each year in this bonding package they're going to look at next Monday. That's above your debt diet, but your budget secretary has indicated that you would go along with it if there was $100 million in each year for transportation. Isn't that accurate?
What you got to watch out for is right now the Republican plan is to have $750 million additional in bonding, which blows our bonding cap, not to mention the debt diet. So we're going to be very careful to hold the line on borrowing.
Governor Raimondo, can you talk about the sell for tolls to some of the taxpayers? I mean, obviously, both states have tolls. You have it in a different capacity, and you have it on trucks, which is what the governor had initially proposed. Doesn't think that that's enough to bring our state into the need of repair. Can you talk about that? And it's my understanding you might actually expand that there's been some stronger footing as far as the legal challenge to doing truck selling.
So I encourage the governor to continue his push. Every state has to decide how much capital is needed, and so I'll leave that to you. When I became governor, we had the great distinction of having the worst roads and bridges in America. It's a problem in New England with the freeze-thaw cycle. Rhode Island's were dead last, and we didn't have a plan to pay for it. So I had my team put together a 10-year infrastructure plan, figure out how much capital was required to get our roads and bridges into a state of good repair. And between the state money and our gas tax and the federal money, there was a gap. And we decided to fill our gap with a toll on trucks, the largest commercial vehicles. And the theory was they're the ones that do most of the damage. So you see it every day. The tractor-trailer trucks, the 18-wheelers, they do the vast majority of the damage. So we imposed a toll on the largest commercial vehicles. It was controversial, as I explained to Ned. It took me 2 legislative sessions. The first time I was not successful. It was controversial. I went back again the second year, and it happened. And today, we have the tolls. We have the revenue. We have been sued We feel very strongly about our position. In fact, we've already had some initial success in the courts. But most important, we have more road work happening in the state of Rhode Island than at any time in our state's history. And thousands of people are at work in high-paying, high-quality jobs fixing our roads and bridges. So I advised him, in a couple of years from now, the controversy will have gone away, but the lasting impact of better infrastructure will be there for decades.
Governor Baker, any polls we should know about in Boston?
Well, one of the things I pointed out in that conversation was people talk about it as tolls, but most people these days are using gantries. And I know that in many cases, one of the things people don't like about tolls is the collision that it creates of sort of cars and trucks coming into these narrow little booths that they have to travel through, and that's not the mechanism I don't imagine that you guys would be using if you did something in Connecticut. I'm assuming you'd be using gantries, which is which is a sort of 21st century technology that for many people gets lost in the conversation about tolls, because people think about tolls as a toll booth, which is really not the way most people play this game anymore.
Governor Baker, you're wrestling with a lot of issues with the MBTA and trying to fix that. You're also trying to expand rail from the South Coast. Of course, you share a line with Providence. Was there any discussion of that, or anything you can look to toward a solution to fund that aging infrastructure?
Well, keep in mind that one of the advantages or disadvantages, depending upon how you think about it, about having 4.5 years under our belts here is, we inherited a public transportation system in Massachusetts that had really not been invested in for decades. I used to comment, still do, that virtually every time anything breaks, it's at least 40 or 50 or 60 years old. Some of the signals are older than my father. And I think the primary objective we had in the first few years was to get the operating budget into what I would call working order, and then to put together a capital program to make the investments that need to be made in the system. And the goal over the next 5 years is to invest $8 billion, which will be by a factor of 2 times the most amount of money that's ever been spent in any 5-year period in the MBTA's history. When we took office, the MBTA was spending less than $400 million on its core infrastructure. The first time they ever spent $1 billion on their core infrastructure was last year. Second time they ever spent $1 billion on their core infrastructure was the year that just ended in June. And the third time they're going to spend over $1 billion on their infrastructure is the year that we just began. So we have a lot of catching up to do there. There's no question about that. But when you're running a system 24/7, 365 days a year, my main objective in the short term is to find more time on the tracks. South Coast Rail has been a promise to the people of southeastern Massachusetts for 30 years, okay? And I got asked when we, and so 2 things happened here. One was I had a whole number of legislators and local officials who said to me, I do not want to go to another groundbreaking for a project that's not going to happen. And they showed me shovels that dated back into the 90s from groundbreakings they went to. They said, if you're going to do a groundbreaking on this project, I want it to be after it's actually under construction. And you have a construction plan and a finance plan. We have a construction plan and a finance plan, which we're implementing, and we had a groundbreaking to celebrate that. That project, because it's running on what I would describe as relatively virgin territory, a big part of it is bringing old lines back into service that aren't currently being used, and then creating station capacity in places where it doesn't exist currently. That's a totally different exercise than the investments we're making in modernizing and upgrading the current system. Those are being made at night and on weekends. And I think one of the big challenges that I believe we have is finding more time at night and on weekends. And if that means coming up with alternative transportation strategies on Saturdays and Sundays on lines that aren't used that much, or finding another 2 hours at night or another 2 hours in the morning on lines that are less traveled at those point in times to create the track time, that's where we're going to go. But the work of actually investing in the core system, I think one of the reasons it didn't happen for so many years was because you have to do it while you continue to run and offer the service. New York talked about shutting down lines for months and just doing the work in that respect, and they got the kind of response from the public that you might expect. And since most of the lines that we're working on carry anywhere from 200,000 to 300,000 people a day, and who depend on it, this process is going to require us to just find the time on the tracks, which is the biggest part of the effort.
I would add two quick things to that. One is the governor mentioned earlier this Transportation Climate Initiative, which I think we all are aligned on trying to move forward along with other governors in our region. That all fits into fixing aging infrastructure as it relates to the train tracks. You know, electrifying the track between Providence and Boston, for example, which would make it faster and cleaner, is important. Reduces congestion, reduces cars. So that would be a potential project that we could do when we're successful with Transportation Climate Initiative. The second thing is, it is certainly a priority of mine to have more and faster train service between Providence and Boston. And so the governor and I have talked about that.
Not the first time I've heard that from my esteemed colleague from
Exactly.
Rhode Island.
I'm on him and on this. We need Amtrak to cooperate. It's not easy, but it's a priority. And so I brought it up again today. I've brought it up before, and it's frankly the whole reason you have these meetings, which is you have to get in a room and just hash it out and try to solve problems. And this is something that I'd like to work on.
All of you agree that transportation is a top priority, right? But yet we live in a part of the country where it requires more money to fix and to upgrade and to modernize. And we live in an expensive part of the world where people feel already taxed out. Where's the threshold, and how do you get people on board with that when we're talking about some major money for these projects?
Well, when you talk about the $8 billion that we're planning to spend, I mean, you don't just get track upgrades and signal upgrades and switch upgrades and power system upgrades, all of which are really important for reliability purposes. You also get somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 new seats on the Red Line, the Orange Line, and the commuter rail. I mean, a couple of the elements of the package are, in addition to new Orange Line and new Red Line cars, which will make it possible to, along with the signal and the switch technology, reduce the headway between cars, which obviously increases the capacity of the system at rush hour. We're also going to get double stacks on the commuter rail routes that we can run that don't need to go under a bridge, which basically doubles the number of cars that are on those things. And if we can add 50 or 100,000 new seats to our public transportation system as part of this modernization and upgrade, that's the kind of investment that I think people will appreciate.
So, Governor Lamont, have you learned any new strategies from meeting with your colleagues today?
I'll just follow up. I mean, one thing we all have in common is we have 100-year-old infrastructure. And as Charlie and Gina were just saying, if we're going to keep economic growth here, we've got to speed up our rail. We've got to end the gridlock, and that's what it is. But your other question about, costs and the such, you saw the new bridge we just put up across I-95. We did it about 30 or 40% less cost than would have cost just a generation ago. They built the bridge off-premise, off-site.
We've done a lot of this, too.
And we're able to do it over 2 weekends, so it was a lot less interruption of the traffic. So it gives people confidence, I hope, that we're trying to be innovative and cost-efficient as we make these needed investments that are so key to economic growth.
Speaking of transportation fees, there's a story in the Boston Globe recently that actually highlighted people in Providence who were going to Maine to register their cars because they can do it on empty properties, and people, like 100 people were all using the same property. Didn't know if the other states were seeing that as well, and are y'all going to gang up on Maine?
People in Connecticut are registering them in Vermont.
Right. I guess this story highlighted Maine, but is there been any effort to try to figure out how to change that? Because I guess the fees are less, and people are running up there to do that.
Over to you, Gina.
I mean, the first I've heard of that story was when it showed up today, and obviously I'm going to ask some of the folks on our team to look into it.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have to all be competitive to make sure that our fees are roughly in line. You never want to be an outlier. But I hadn't planned on getting after the governor of Maine, if that's the question.
Governors, did the three of you talk about the ongoing situation at the Registry of Motor Vehicles in Massachusetts with the lack of sharing of out-of-state violations from Massachusetts to other states and the lack of Massachusetts checking violations. And Governor Lamont specifically, what has been your thoughts and reactions as you've watched this unfold in Massachusetts?
I'll talk generally, that we did talk a lot about more efficient and effective sharing of data, not specific to the DMV, where that was slowed up, but the data got there. What we talked about when it comes to purchasing of IT, when it comes to purchasing of software, not only does that bring down the costs, but we also have interoperability of all these systems so that Massachusetts and Rhode Island, Connecticut can talk electronically at all times, sharing the wage data that Gina was talking about, sharing the DMV data in real time going forward, and bringing down costs and giving us some redundant support. So that was broadly how we talked about that issue.
In Rhode Island, there was a hospital merger that kind of fell apart. Can you just talk about that specifically? And then I don't know if there are common issues among the states where you're trying to figure out healthcare and local hospitals trying to stay above water in a tough economy for healthcare.
Yes, so that's breaking news today. I was, as you know, I led those discussions, or I encouraged the parties to come together. And I'm really very disappointed that they have decided not to stay at the table. I think the right solution for Rhode Island now is a locally owned, locally governed, locally managed, integrated academic medical center. And I still think that, and I regret that the parties weren't able to make that happen today. I've encouraged them to try to deepen their the way they work together and their clinical collaboration and their academic collaboration, build some trust among the different hospital systems. And I am hopeful that 6, 9, 12, 18 months down the road, maybe they can figure out a way to get back together. We didn't talk, hospital mergers are very tricky, very complicated, and very specific. So certainly we didn't talk about that. Every state and every governor, I think, struggles with making sure that healthcare is accessible, affordable, and high quality. Academic medical centers are also an economic engine. Probably no better example than in Boston. The collaboration between partners and Harvard Medical School is an economic engine. And so it was for all those reasons that I was pushing to create this integrated academic medical center, because I think it would bring down cost, increase quality, and create jobs. And I hope that that is something that can be achieved in the future.
Partners wouldn't be back in the mix, would it?
That's up to them, but it's not something that I would encourage or support at this time.
I can follow up on the DMV registry question this fellow asked. Our deputy commissioner said that the Connecticut DMV did everything right, that your registry of motor vehicles was at fault with regard to this guy in the truck in New Hampshire.
I said the same thing after we reviewed it.
So, and
Same thing.
What's happening at your registry of motor vehicles to try to make sure the information the Connecticut DMV sends you is acted on properly?
So the first thing we did was review all of the incoming mail that hadn't been processed. And that, believe it or not, by the time we got done with all of it, some of it dated back to 2011. And sorted it into what I would describe as sort of three piles. The first pile was infractions that would lead to a suspension. And those suspensions have been issued. It involved roughly 1,700 drivers and about 2,000 suspensions overall. Now, remember, no, this is just Massachusetts. Yeah, and the take was from all the states that had sent documentation in. Now, keep in mind that at any given time, there's roughly 300,000 people in Massachusetts who have suspended driver's licenses. The first thing we did was went through all of the commercial driver license information and updated all of that. And the real tragedy in this, in addition to the terrible loss of life, is there was only one license that should have been suspended based on the cleanup of the CDLs, and that was the one for Zukoski. The second thing they're doing is now going back and reviewing all of the other stuff that didn't get processed, again, dating back to 2011. And if there's any kind of minor or significant infraction at all that's involved there, they're acting on it. The third thing they're doing is working down the backlog on anything that involved outgoing mail, which also, for a very long period of time, hadn't been followed up on a regular basis. And that process at this point is more or less done. And we brought in Grant Thornton, who's doing a forensic audit of how we ended up in this place in the first place. And we're also sending all of our records, all of our RMV records, to the National Driver Registry and checking all of them against that National Driver Registry to see what comes from it.
The three of you all mentioned energy. I'm curious, given BOEM's decision to postpone what was an expected permit that was going to be given to Vineyard Wind indefinitely, Governor Baker, how concerned are you that that could jeopardize the timeline of the Vineyard Wind project? And since all three of you are pursuing offshore wind projects, are you concerned about the signal that the federal government is sending by delaying these permits?
I can't speak for these two on this, but what I will say is I think the feds, generally speaking, treat these as standalone and fact-specific issues. There's no question the fact that the Vineyard Wind one is the biggest project of its kind in U.S. history means it's receiving what I would describe as a significant and probably more significant level of scrutiny, probably appropriately, from the federal agencies. We've talked to the federal agencies about this. They've made pretty clear to us that the reason they didn't render a decision and the reason why they didn't put a date on rendering a decision was because they wanted to continue the dialogue and the discussion with Vineyard Wind around some of the outstanding issues. And they gave Vineyard Wind and us a fair amount of guidance with respect to the things we should focus on, and people are going to be focusing on those between now and the end of the month.
Is that the one that's staging at the London? Vineyard one?
That's a different one.
Different one, yeah.
But I will tell you, when it comes to what we're doing off in New London, we're doing that with Massachusetts, we're doing that with Rhode Island. Those bids are going out. Those bids are going out at more or less the same time. It's going to be a joint bid. It gives us the best opportunity to get the very best price for all three of our states, a reliable and renewable energy source in wind. So I certainly hope the federal government will be there to support this. It's got strong bipartisan support across these three states. It's absolutely vital to us to have this homegrown carbon-free power. You know, I think with that, everybody, I got a couple of governors. I got to get back to work, and I really appreciate you both coming.
Governor Raimondo, what specifically did you ask Governor Baker to do to speed service, rail service on the Providence line? Governor Baker, what was your response? And all three of you, what is Amtrak doing that's causing a problem?
Well, the thing to remember about everything that involves Amtrak lines, appropriately, Amtrak gets first dibs. So if one of your objectives here is to create additional service or nonstop service, you got to figure out a way to factor that into the rest of the Amtrak schedule, recognizing that if Amtrak owns the tracks, they are going to be sort of first in line with respect to how that works out. And that is a negotiation that has to take place between Amtrak and the Commonwealth and Rhode Island. Same is true with the line that runs from New Haven up to Springfield and shortly up to Greenfield. Amtrak's a big player in this space, and you can't just wish that they're not there and that they don't matter, because they do.
Additionally, so I think we're aligned that it's a good thing to do for both of our economies. There are some practical stumbling blocks, as the governor just said. Additional to what he said, we need the cars, like simple things. We need the train sets, which Amtrak has. So one of the things we talked about today is having our Rhode Island's Department of Transportation work with MBTA, work with Amtrak, and our federal delegation to try to work with Amtrak to not only to make the scheduling changes that might be necessary, to make the track upgrades that might be necessary, but also to help us procure, either by purchasing or by leasing, the train sets so that we can make this happen. So I'd like to say this after having brought it up several times, today being the most recent, we are aligned that this is a good thing to have happen. Now we have to work with my team, with his team, with our federal delegation, with Amtrak to push through the practical roadblocks, if you will, to make it happen.
I'm new to this, but I'll just tell you that Senator Chris Murphy has a plan out there that makes a certain amount of sense to me, that we, together, we buy out, take ownership of the tracks, so we put them all under a regional authority so we control our transportation future together. With that, I want to thank you all so much for coming, governors.
Thank you for hosting.
Thanks.
See you in Providence in October.